Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today's going to be a quick one where I go over my settings on my Sony A7 IV to hopefully help you guys get the best results for your videos. Let's start off with file format. I shoot in XAVC HS4K. It's still high quality enough, but it's not as big as the XAVC SI, I think it's called. If you're shooting in XAVC SI, you're gonna have massive files, but the HS version is good enough. Next, you want to make sure you're shooting in 10-bit 422. If you have the option to shoot in 10-bit, I recommend always shooting in 10-bit. 10-bit when compared to 8-bit just has a lot more dynamic range. There's a lot more details you can recover in the shadows and the highlights, so I recommend shooting in 10-bit 422 if you can. Now I'm shooting on a Sony A7 IV, but these settings should be available with any newer Sony cameras. Next, we're going to talk about shooting in log and the benefits of shooting in log. So when you're shooting videos, I recommend always shoot in log. The reason behind why you should always shoot in log is because when you're shooting in log, you have a lot more details that you can save and you can recover later on in post when you're grading your footage. Now, to be honest, log profiles look kind of trash in camera. Everything looks flat, you don't really have a lot of saturation, there's no contrast, so it's kind of gross to look at, honestly. However, when you're shooting in log, because the profile is so flat, you have so much more room to recover in your shadows and in your highlights. If you're not shooting in log, the contrast is baked in, the highlights are baked in, the shadows are baked in. So if you screw up any of your exposure, it's very hard to correct it in post. This is why I always recommend shooting in a log profile. Now on Sony cameras, you have S-Log2 and S-Log3. If you have S-Log3, I recommend shooting in S-Log3. S-Log2 is fine, but with S-Log3, you're just gonna get a little bit more dynamic range to work with. Now when it comes to color profiles, there are different color profiles on the Sonys. You have S-Gamut, S-Gamut3, S-Gamut3 Cine, and S-Cinetone. I would recommend choosing S-Cinetone. For my settings, I shoot in S-Log3 as my gamma picture profile, but I use S-Cinetone as my color profile. I feel like in S-Cinetone, the colors sit a little bit better, you get more natural skin tones in your videos, and it's what comes on the Sony cinema lines. So for me personally, if you guys have it on your cameras, I would recommend choosing S-Cinetone for your color profile. Notice I'm not saying gamma. Gamma stays at S-Log3. So your gamma stays at S-Log3, but your color profile will be S-Cinetone. If you don't have S-Cinetone in your camera, that's fine. My second choice would be S-Gamut3 Cine. Along with shooting in S-Log3 and choosing the color profile to be S-Cinetone, I also make some minor tweaks with my settings. I bump up the saturation to +15, and I bump up the sharpness from -7, which is the default setting, to -1. The reasoning behind why I bump up the saturation and the sharpness in camera is because I personally feel like the color grade sits better when you do that. For example, if you're applying a video LUT, or lack of better words, a video preset. Sometimes, because the log profile is so flat, the LUT actually will have a hard time deciphering which color is which. So you'll get very minute color shifts. Your orange might shift to yellow, your red might shift to orange. It's not a super obvious color shift. Like I said, it's very minor, but if you really look out for it, you can see it. So when you add saturation to your log profile, the LUT actually has an easier time deciphering which color is which, and that's why it sits better on your video footage. Now as for sharpening, I bump the sharpening up to -1 like I mentioned earlier, and why I do that is because sharpening in post is a very effect heavy task, so if you're adding sharpness in post, you're actually slowing down your whole process by a lot. So why not do it in camera if you can? So in terms of log settings, that's basically it. I shoot in S-Log3 for my gamma profile and S-Cinetone for my color profile. And then I bump the saturation up to +15, and I bump the sharpening up from -7 to -1. Along with that, you'll also want to be at the correct shutter speed. Now, there's the 180 rule when it comes to video, so your shutter speed should always be double of what your frame rate is. Talking about frame rate, if you're shooting vlogs, I recommend to always shoot in 24 frames. Don't listen to the 30 frames, people. 24 frames. That's gonna get you the best look. If you're in Europe, I think it's 25 frames, but 24, 25 frames per second is where you should be if you're shooting everyday scenes or if you're shooting vlogs and nothing in slow motion. So because you're shooting at 24 frames per second, your shutter speed will be 1/50th of a second, because that's double of 24. If you're shooting 60 frames per second, then your shutter speed will be 120 or 125. Lastly, this is something I do to help me check that I have the right exposure in camera. I set up a custom button on my Sony to be a toggle on and off for a gamma assist. When gamma assist is on, I can see the colors more clearly, I can see the contrast more clearly, and then this way I know if my footage is properly exposed. I recommend, if you haven't done this in your camera, to set up a custom function to toggle on and off gamma assist. It really helps. And that's it. So remember, always shoot in log, because you have the most dynamic range to work with in post. You can recover shadows and highlights easier. If you're not shooting in log, it's just a lot harder to save if you screw up on your exposures. And S-Log3, shoot in S-Log3 if you can. If you don't, S-Log2 is fine. S-Log3 is gonna get you better dynamic range. And remember, shoot in 10-bit 422 if you're able to. Most newer Sony cameras should be able to shoot 10-bit. S-Log3 for gamma profile, S-Cinetone for color profile, and then bump the saturation up to +15 and bump the sharpening up from -7 to -1. Keep your frame rate at 24 frames per second, and for your shutter speed, double that, so 1/50th of a second. And if you do all that, I promise you your footage will look crispy and clean after you grade it. Hopefully this video will help you guys out if you guys are just starting with videography. Thanks for watching, and see you guys next time. Bye.